Today I answer a question that no BMW driver has ever asked. And that question is, what does a 6-cylinder M340i steering rack feel like on a 4-cylinder 330i? And if you're wondering why would I go through so much trouble if you're not up to speed, it's because I'm putting that B58 in the car. So the motor that drives the stock steering rack on a 330i is on an angle like this, and the motor is quite huge. This is a dual pinion rack. Because there's so much room in front of the engine bay, they had the luxury of being able to do something different with the steering rack. And in my opinion, it feels like it has more communication than the stock M340i rack, but I have no choice but to put it in if I want to put a 6-cylinder. So as you can see, this motor is a lot smaller and it sits straight across, which will allow for clearance of the 6-cylinder. I had a G80, I had the M340i, now I have the 330i. So the large motor that's on an angle in the 330i is considered a dual pinion, low friction. So it communicates a little bit better in my opinion, but at the same time, this is a little heavier and this feels more luxurious. It makes the car feel more premium, like it's more like a 5 Series than 3 Series. That's my memory of the way the car felt, and the G80 wasn't far off of this, and it looks similar to this anyway. I guess you could say with the 330i rack, it requires less effort from the driver, and you kind of get some more feedback, but it kind of feels like a little bit of a lower end car because of that, but it's more of a communicative car, and it feels more raw, so I preferred that. Going to this, I know is going to make the car feel slightly more premium. This will be probably a little bit more numb. This is supposedly a belt-driven ball and nut design. And it's similar to the old F30 340i's. But we need to get the car jacked up, wheels off, tie rods disconnected to pull the stock rack. Alright, so a brief interruption from the future regarding what I did with this steering rack swap. I want to throw a disclaimer out there regarding this. I don't recommend that you guys follow along. I did it purely because of the fact that I want to fit a 6-cylinder engine inside this engine bay. Only this rack would clear that. Does it feel like an enhancement on a 330i? Yes, but at the same time, can every 330i do this? Chances are no. There was a line drawn in the sand roughly around mid-2020 where DME started to get locked down, and then later in 2020, the other modules in the car started to get locked down with something called secure coding. At the end of the day, you'd have to be on the internet, you'd have to have a cloud handshake with their servers to do anything like this, and it has to be a vetted configuration. Luckily, I didn't have to manipulate any software. It's just literally the exact same software that was on the car prior, except it's checking for different handshakes with regards to hardware downstream to tie it all together. But this is a known, safe, good configuration, which is a match to what this car was anyway. So from that perspective, we're clear, it's good, but I'm not going to recommend you follow along. If you want to follow along in preparation for a 6-cylinder swap on a really early 2020 or a 2019 330i, then potentially this information could be useful to you. But throwing it out there, this will be an interesting video if you want to see the trials and tribulations of what I had to do to make it all work, because nobody's ever done this before, at least not documented. And you'll get my driving impressions and whatnot after the fact. Thank you. So I just have a T30 Allen sitting in here, touching up against the control arm, and I'm using a 21 wrench. I'm going to go after the electrical connector for the power steering rack. I'm going to get this stuff out of the way up here so I can reach down. So the book calls for supporting the engine and lowering the subframe to be able to get clearance to be able to remove the steering rack complete. But since there's so much room on the 4-cylinder, I'm thinking maybe I could try taking off the tie rods in the car and then undoing the screws and trying to like angle it down to make things a little bit easier. So I'm going to try that. So I'm going to pop off that clamp there and go after the inner tie rod to see if I can actually lower it down that way. So I put the steering wheel dead straight, and I'm going to take out this E12 over here. Going after the E18 steering rack bolts. One of the bolts I had to get from below because there was very little room, so I can get the 3 from the top. Okay, so since there was so much clearance on the 4-cylinder, I was able to get this out without needing to drop the subframe. Big time saver in that respect. But regardless, this is a 330i rack. This is the M340i rack. This is a dual pinion. This is an APA belt drive, nut and ball, I believe it's called. The B58 wouldn't have cleared this, and over here, it would have been a conflict. I had to move to this. This is an updated version of what used to come on the F30s. Now, it can be argued that they went for this because they were trying to aim for some better steering feel on the base model, and if they had the room, they would have put this in on the 6-cylinder as well. But at the same time, from a cost standpoint, there's single pinion like what you'd find on an X1 or 1 series, and then there's dual pinion, which comes on the 330i, and then you have this style. This is the most expensive to manufacture. So you have to ask yourself, did they kind of go for steering feel at the same time save some money because it's a cheaper car and they want to bring the cost of the car down? Hard to say. But regardless, what nobody knows is how does an M340i rack feel on a 330i? Because maybe all the difference on this rack came from the fact that the engine is so far back and there's better weight distribution. Who knows? I'll be able to tell you in this video. Regardless, there's no reason why they couldn't have run the M340i rack in the 330i. So there's either one of two reasons. They did it to save money to bring the cost down, or they did it because this was a way to give more feel on the 330i's. I honestly feel like this had more feel, but I guess I'll know shortly when I put this in and I still have my 4-cylinder engine so we can see the difference between the two in terms of feel. If you notice the power plug on the 330i rack, the pins are stacked on top of each other, so they're vertical. And on the M340i rack, it is horizontal. So I modified my plug. I wouldn't recommend that normally, but this rack I got cheap because the plastic piece that it clicks into was sheared off. If by some chance someone wanted to replicate this, either for a swap or because they want to see how a 330i would feel with an M340i rack, depending on my feedback, I would normally recommend that you just replace this whole harness. But under the circumstances, because I saved so much money on the rack, I was willing to modify that to make it work. It's not the most refined solution, but it's going to be a cost-saving measure to make my B58 swap viable. This has an indicator to tell you that you're in the center position. So does this. I put them both in that position, and I measured the length here and saw that they're equal. This sticks out 40 mm, and this sticks out 32 mm when it's centered. So if I were to just hope for a close alignment, I will have to take the car for an alignment after, but I need to bring this in by 8 millimeters on both sides. I just use a 16 on this. Putting the new rack in place. I slid on the steering shaft. I'm going to put some fresh blue Loctite on here. The CAN bus connector is exactly the same. I'm going to start torquing down the bolts. You start over here, you go to that corner, you come over here, and you go to number 4 last. You're supposed to start at 60 Newton meters as stage 1, 96 Newton meters, and then 90 degrees. I'll have to go underneath the car to get number 4. The rack can move around by maybe a millimeter or two. So I just kind of looked at where it was positioned originally. You know, it's kind of a match on both the 330i rack and this rack in terms of where you can see where the washer from the bolt head made contact. It's kind of like they bias it more toward the driver's side. So I'm just going to try to match that and make sure that I perfectly cover the existing mounting point. Of course, it will need alignment after. There's not enough room to get a torque wrench on the number 4 bolt, so I just went as tight as I could make it. You're supposed to go another 90 degrees from that point, but I cranked it to the point where I was moving at 20 degrees and it felt like the bolt was going to snap. Maybe because my extension is too long. All I know is when I removed it, it didn't take anywhere near that much effort. So we're just going with approximately 100 foot-pounds on all these bolts. That should be plenty. It's like a wheel torque. If you guys were wondering, if you have an all-wheel drive 330i, you're going to have a similar rack to this, but it's a lower-end version from what I could tell. I'm going to feed the tie rod into place. I'm going to put a new clamp on there. I'm going to use a crimp tool to crimp up that clamp. So as I mentioned, that stub is 8 millimeters shorter. So I adjusted the overall tie rod length by 8 millimeters, but I shouldn't have done it that much. When I checked everything out, the wheels were pointing inward because for every rotation of the outer tie rod, it has a doubling effect on the angle of the wheel. So if I was going to try to roughly approximate that, I'd land somewhere between 3 and 4 mm. But I still have those marks on my tie rod, so I'm just going to shorten the outer tie rod slightly, more like 3 or 4 mm instead of 8 total, and see if that makes them look like they're pointing straight. That's how my harness ended up. For the sake of being able to get to the alignment shop, I just did the string method where you put a string at the rear wheel. Technically, I should have this on the ground with the weight of the tire on the ground and then have something underneath it that allows it to swivel back and forth. This is not really perfect, but at the same time, I'm only doing toe and I had no alignment issues prior to this. So this would be good enough to get me to the alignment shop. So in relation to the rear wheel, the front wheels are towed in about 2 millimeters at the front. And it is the same over here. And we have the steering wheel pointed straight. The steering rack is known to be quicker than the 330i rack. It's a variable speed rack, but I believe it can do a little bit more aggressive active steering. When the car is off, it's one full rotation to go left and one full rotation to go right. I think that's as fast as it could be. And on the 330i rack, it was 1.75 turns from center to one side. So it's a lot quicker with the car off. I don't think it's that dramatic when you're driving, but we'll see. So that's what happens if you just put the rack in without any coding. Okay, so I loaded up ISTA, and these are the errors I'm getting. There's two related to the EPS. Control unit is not encoded. Encoding data does not match the vehicle. So it knows there's software on there, but it knows it's not a match. Inside the car, it says increase steering effort. And then it says you can continue driving, increase steering effort, and then you have the symbol here. Because the steering rack is not encoded to the car, there was no power steering to move it into position. It was very heavy. So we'll start the coding process. I'll show you what's involved. You gotta triple tap the start button 3 times to put it into diagnostic mode. Loading up pieces. Select this first one here. We're gonna read the vehicle order. Save it. We're gonna read our ECU tree. Save this. We're going to go down to our EPS system here. And as you can see, we can find it. It's saying there's no configuration file. That's why it has FFFFFF. So we got to actually flash this. What I want to do here is edit this and change the vehicle type to 5U73 for a rear-wheel drive M340i. We're going to save this and we're going to calculate it to see if it considers it valid, which it does. Now we're going to go to VCM. Now we're going to click on Master here and read the I-step. So we can see here, it shows me my shipment number. So it's going to be 1811524. We're going to go to Comfort Mode, TAL Calculating. We're going to load our modified vehicle order. We're going to load our SVT file. Click on Complete Flash. And then we're going to choose the shipment number that we just saw, which is going to be 18524 right here. And our target, there's two. You can choose the latest version and the second latest version. So I'm just going to leave it on the second latest and have it calculate to see what changes need to be made. So what it's saying here is at the EPS, it's going to change it from having no coding data to having coding data, but it thinks that the car is an M340i to accept it. We're going to save this. We're going to save it as G20 SVT Sol. Now we're going to click on Calculation right here. Save this as TAL Calculation. We don't have to click on this hardware IDs from SVT Actual under this instance because it's not going to be changing any of the hardware IDs. Now we're going to go to Expert Mode, TAL Processing. We're going to load the last file that we generated. Now, first thing you want to do before anything is uncheck all this. Now we're going to load this up, this SOL. And we want to load the FA, but I want to load the modified FA that says it's an M340i, which I modified here. Now we're going to go down to the EPS right here. So we don't have a hardware deinstall or anything like that happening. It's just going to be software and updating the configuration files. I have the car in a 25 amp charge, so I can go ahead and initiate this flash. So I'm going to click on Start. Looks like everything went well, and we got a green bar at the bottom. So we're going to hit OK here. Now I can disconnect. We'll see what ISTA has to say now. I expect that we're still going to have one fault code which requires calibration. It's typical to have so many codes after a flash because it technically lost communication with everything temporarily. So let's delete the fault memory. Okay, so EPS is green. I'm not getting anything about enabling the rack or doing a startup procedure, but I'll double check that that's not present. I'm not expecting to have any issues because I'm not showing any DSC errors. So I'm going to try giving the car a start now and see if I have power steering. Yep. I have power steering. So I'm not getting an automatic malfunction regarding parking assistance when I put it in drive or park. So I think I'll take it for a test drive now and see if everything's working. All right, I'm jumping in from the future here. You just saw me install the steering rack and code it to the car. After that, I spent a bunch of time trying to chase error codes, not realizing that my car was missing a key piece. If you look down in there, you can see there's a vibration motor. This is a G80 M3 steering wheel, but I could have either gotten a steering wheel from an M340i or a G80. You can see the tricolor stitching. This is from 2024, so relatively no miles, and it looks really clean. It has the hands-on detection, so the capacitive touch, because it's designed for our driver's assistance professional. It's heated. So I started to price out how much would the harness be, how much would this module be along with the vibration motor, and I quickly realized I might as well just get a used steering wheel. I figured it's a good opportunity to get one that's clean because mine's starting to get a bit shiny, and might as well get the tricolor stitching for not too much more money than what these individual pieces would have cost. I'll install this on a car, and what I'm expecting is after putting this on and the simple encoding of the steering rack to the car, we could pretty much be done with the project. But there's also a bunch of nuance to go into, so I'll tell you on the screen where you should skip to if you want to just see the end result, or if you want to see what I figured out and why it makes sense to encode certain modules and whatnot, then stick around. But for now, let's get this tossed on the car. Alright, that's a nice simple upgrade. For anyone wondering, I have a module on the way to make these M1 and M2 buttons functional. It'll basically allow you to cycle through Sport, Sport Plus, Sport Individual, Comfort, Eco, etc. Basically, as you press this, it's going to go through all the cycles one by one, starting from Comfort all the way through. So that's going to be a nice handy feature. So I bought a kit for retrofitting the M1 and M2 buttons. It's basically a wireless transmitter that talks to a box that will switch the modes for you. I can't use the buttons that came with the steering wheel. Comes with a trim piece, but I won't need that since this is an OEM G80 wheel. And assuming you had a standard wheel and you wanted to put this slit into it, it comes with this piece. But this wouldn't have worked here because it would have been heated, and this is already a G80 wheel again. So let's get this installed. Alright, so if you're driving along and you want to go into Sport, press that once. And then if you wanted your individual mode, press it again. Or if you wanted your standard mode, press it again. Or go to Plus. And then if you want to go back to Comfort, tap it once. Now you're in Comfort. If you want Eco, tap it again. You can cycle through Eco mode. Go back over here to get you back to Comfort. Once again to get you to Sport Plus. And then M2 to go back. Very intuitive, and that's going to come in very handy. What I can't remember off the top of my head is if the vibration would have been coming from the steering rack itself and if it was pulsating the wheel via the rack, and that's why this doesn't have a vibration motor. From memory, I don't even really recall it ever really vibrating. It would just push you back in a lane if you were to cross the lane. So I just never imagined a scenario where a car wouldn't have the vibration motor and has driver's assistance professional. Check the description if one of you guys wants to do this for a retrofit. You just have to get the airbag. It's a heated wheel. It has the hands-on detection for a driver's assistance professional. No vibration motor. You could potentially use it on a 330i. So I'm back from the test drive. The first time I tried to activate backup assistance, it just for a split second, it had to recalibrate. Then it started working. It was backing up the driveway. Remembering the way that I pulled in, so that was working, and self-parking is working. I'm not sure if it needs a calibration to work perfectly, but it was working otherwise. And then now we have other errors regarding just the expected feedback from the steering rack to particular modules. So we're going to have to default encode a few modules. Looks like the CAFS module, BDC module, and I'll check to see if there's any other ones. Okay, so digging into the codes here, modules that need an encoding, BDC, another BDC, we have DSC, CAFS, cameras, and then SAS, which would be the driver's assistance, another one of the driver's assistants, and then we have BDC, and this should be fine. PMA. This started working the first time I tried using it, but I'll see if it actually works properly. Alright, in this clip my car connected to my phone, so it cut out the microphone, but this is a good opportunity to bring you up to speed as to where I was. So I had taken the car for a test drive after doing the flash programming. My driver's assistance system said it was restricted because it was not finding the vibration motor in the steering wheel. That's one of the checks it would do. And it happened to get at 20 miles an hour and 50, I believe, or 45. There's different modules that were looking for it. So that led me to believe that maybe there was an issue with the coding because the default encoding that was on the module would no longer match the hardware. But it turns out that the modules are going to run the same software whether you have a 330i or an M340i. The only thing is it'll look for particular hardware to be present or not present to determine how to run. So in my case, it was not finding the vibration motor and it wasn't happy about that. So I started to think about what modules could use a default encode, and in this clip I'm doing the BDC module, and then I'll go through all the modules that seemed relevant based on the codes I was getting. I'm including this footage because it will help you understand your car a little bit better in terms of how it works. We did the BDC, and now the DSC VIP is the other module that needs to be encoded. So it's not going to be the brake regulation system, it's going to be this one here. So we're going to right click and code this. Good to go there. Now you want to look for the CAFS right here. If there's two, choose the second one. Code. Good to go. And lastly, the SAS module. So right here. Good to go. And now I'm going to reread and then delete all the codes and go for a drive. If you notice in this clip, we have a new code steering wheel module, wrong version. Now that we told the BDC module what it is, so to speak, it was saying, well, then this is not matching what I expected. And I actually found that if I were to flash program the gateway module, which is connected to the BDC, it no longer had that code because it's not looking for things in the same way. And given the modules are going to run the same software, whether it's a 330i or M340i, that is where I feel if the vibration motor was present right out the gate after just encoding the rack to the car and flashing it, that it may not throw any errors because at the end of the day it finds the hardware to make it all work. But if you're going to tell the module how to error check, so to speak, by coding things and telling them their true identity, that's where they start to throw codes appropriately. So really you should be encoding all modules and flash programming them to bring everything up to speed. But if you just did the bare minimum, it doesn't mean it wouldn't work. There's a check regarding the lane recognition and the vibration you would get. I believe the M340i rack actually generates more feedback when you're going over a lane. So I guess there's a conflict in that versus what would be installed in the steering wheel in terms of the vibration motor or something along those lines. So there's a check where it's expecting this if it was an M340i, but I don't have this LRE TLC LHZ taster or whatever this is. I just have LRE LHZ taster. So I'm going to change this, save this, go back, and we'll code NCD now. So the steering wheel module wrong version is showing no, which is good. I'm going to delete again just to make sure. Okay, solved. That issue is gone. Great news there. Okay, so I was looking into this a little bit further and I figured let's try to think about, first of all, I changed the setting to match what the 330i was, which was fine. I got rid of the error, but then it didn't get rid of the fact that as soon as you start driving, it's still getting the wrong feedback. And I figured, okay, well, let's think about what module is upset with the values it's getting, and then let's try to encode that. But that is the ZGM module, the central gateway module. That just means that, there's no easy way, there's no configuration file to just easily tell it what's going on. So I'm going to start by trying to disable the code. So I'm going to just edit this. Instead of all these, I'm just going to say don't look for that, disregard, and let's see if that lets everything work as it should. So here's what I've gathered. Let's just look at one of these main codes. Basically, through the gateway module section of the body domain controller, which handles interpreting signals back and forth between different modules, it's saying, hey, when I was trying to talk to the stability control, I'm not getting the transmitter signal that I'm expecting based on the way the car is equipped. So it's saying we have an invalid vibration status coming from the steering wheel. Something's a mismatch. So I'm loading my vehicle order that's modified to say it's an M340i. I'm reading the ECU trees. I'm going down. And so we have BDC body. It has configuration files that you can manipulate. And there's only this last one here that you would do anything with. Now the section that would talk about the variant for this lane keep and whatnot is right here. LIN for the LIN system for monitoring. It's kind of like a bus, a network. If we see here, you have the LIN variant for this LRE. And it's basically saying that when it is an M340i, it's going to have this TLC here. When it's not an M340i, it's just going to have LRE, LHC, and this. But TLC is for time to line crossing. So what I remember from my M340i and G80 is, let's just say you're crossing over a lane or you're gonna go over a lane. You'll get a buzz on this and it'll kind of try to push you back in a very steady way with an even rate. But on the M340i, as you're approaching it more aggressively, it may actually try to snap the wheel back out of your hand, and it will just do it based on how fast you're likely to go off the road. And that would happen based on the type of rack. The rack can actually react more aggressively and actually pull you back quickly, kind of give it a jerk to be like, get your attention, versus this where you'll get a vibration and it'll kind of slowly try to just bring you back over, because all it can do is control the second pinion of the steering rack electronically to bring things back. There's no variable ratio or aggression in terms of how it would take over how the wheel responds in a non-linear fashion. So there's an expectation that, okay, well, the car now has this, so we need to transmit information through the gateway section of the BDC to work with the fact that it can do that. Now if we go back here, you can see that there's configuration files here. You can do FDL coding, you can change things. But on the gateway section, this is basically just the network where signals get passed through, and there's no configuration things that are supposed to be changed, but it still needs to know that the FA has changed, and there's only one way to do it, the same way that we did it with the steering rack itself. We have to flash it. Now if I were to load the vehicle order, M340i modified vehicle order, and I were to read the ECU tree, and if I were to check it against the stock software, which was from 18524, and then the second last version based on the data files I have on my car, I'm going to tell it to calculate to see what modules need to be updated based on the vehicle order change. So it's saying it's going to change things all the way down to the bootloader level. It's going to change the configuration files and whatnot on the BDC. You're supposed to do the BDC body and BDC gateway. I believe they're all in the same module. You should do them together. But what we don't want to see is these hardware versions being read. That would almost indicate that you have the wrong BDC module for what you're trying to do. So we know that it's the same BDC module for 330i and M340i. And then the only way you can actually encode or talk to the gateway module is to flash it. There's no way to encode it like I did earlier in the video. So we'll go over here to expert mode, TAL processing. We will load our TAL calculation from the other day. As usual, uncheck everything. So it's the same process I showed earlier in the video when I was flashing the rack itself. Now we load the modified vehicle order. Even though it says 330i, I changed that to have the 5U73 M340i code. And I'm only concerned with BDC body 3 and BDC gateway 3. It's going to flash the appropriate information. Now we'll hit start up at the top here. Okay, we're green, good to go. We'll disconnect, we'll go back here, delete default memory in ISTA. So before, when I default encoded it as an M340i, I would get an error right away unless I disabled the check for the vibration motor. And then if I drove it, then it would still say, hey, I'm getting the wrong signal. So right now that's not pulling up by default, even though the coding matches an M340i, which is a good sign, so I'm going to take it for a test drive. Okay, so I didn't have to go very far to get the same code triggered, but I also have less errors now. I don't have that default error regarding the vibration motor being wrong that I did when I would encode it as an M340i. So the software in the BDC and gateway needed an update to be happy. Now it seems as though the VIP module, but the VIP module in terms of vehicle control, the DSC module, but for the self-drive and all that, needs to be updated from the looks of it, because encode didn't take care of it. So we're just going to flash that one as well. And we can actually go back and see DSC VIP if it needed to change any software. Okay, I'd like to show you something. If I were to read the vehicle order off the car, save it, we'll just make it a little more straightforward, so I'm just calling it M340i. Now I can edit it. Go here, like I've already shown you in the past. We're going to edit this to 5U73. 5U73 is rear-wheel drive M340i for America. So we're going to save it again. Now I'm going to do TAL calculating. I've loaded this in TAL calculating. So like we talked about, the DSC has to be told about the M340i rack, the brake regulation system, and the vehicle integration platform need to be aware of this. So I loaded the M340i vehicle order. Now if I were to go to VCM, I believe that's Vehicle Configuration Manager. And if I were to read the shipment I-step, meaning this car came from the factory with this software. This software was made in November 18 in version 524, and it's currently on 585. What you'd want to do when you want to do a software update is either read your vehicle order or load a modified one, read the ECU tree, And if you notice, certain modules here don't need to be updated. That's why they're black. Certain modules are going to be updated. They go from blue to red. But I have to put in the shipment, which is November 2018, 524. And then you can do a target of the latest or the second latest based on the files on your computer. And you calculate to see which modules need an update. Okay, so now I can scroll down and I can see what needs to be changed and all that. Now when I get to the dynamic stability control, it's basically saying this is not plausible. I'm going to skip these because this doesn't make sense. The reason it doesn't make sense is the M340i didn't exist when this car came out. What I can do is load the modified vehicle order, and I've already done this. This is less important, but this would be the shipment date or the date it was made. You can update that. Even if you don't update that, it's still going to calculate properly, but that's my modified vehicle order. So back into TEL, calculating. Saying this doesn't seem plausible. So now that I've loaded this, I will then choose a shipment date around the time that the M340i came out. That was a March 19 build, and I know that is plausible because I used to have an M340i with that build date. It would be an early car. So better to do an early car so it matches the rest of the software on the car, worst case, or hardware IDs and modules. But we'll go 319, and I'll just select one of the later ones. So the last one, 319, and target's the same. And then we're watching here. We want to see these change from all blue to either black or red, or just stay blue. So we're going to calculate. So now when I scroll down, so now I can actually see the module. So the bootloader doesn't need to change, which is good because if that flash goes wrong, you break your module. And then the hardware doesn't change. So in terms of how it would be sold as a module, it's the same part number based on the software that's preloaded into it for a G20. Doesn't matter if it's an M340i or not. So there's a couple things that could happen here. We could have seen the software needing to change to a different version, so it would actually be a different code here. But the codes seem to be the same, just newer versions of it. So it's primarily just going to be modifying the configuration file to match an M340i via the flash. It's not running completely different software. And if it was running completely different software, we probably expect the hardware ID to need to change as well. And then we'd be clicking hardware IDs from the actual module as it is now. So it makes sense that that is all that's going to change. At least that's how I understand it. Now I'm going to save this file. Now we're going to build a new TAL calculation based on this. We're not getting any errors because it's plausible against all the modules on the car, even if I was flashing everything, which is kind of cool. Save this. Now we'll go over to TAL processing. I'm going to say yes on this because I wanted to use the modified vehicle order. We're going to load our TAL calculation that we just built. We're going to load our SOL from today. So this vehicle order actually is for the M340i with the March 19 build date. Now we want to deselect everything, and we want to select just the DSC BRS and the DSC VAP. They have to be done as a pair, and it's just going to be changing the software and re-encoding. So we're going to click start. So we're going to hit OK on this, and we'll scroll up to see what warnings. It says it finished with warnings, which is yellow, and that, saying, it wrote whatever I wanted, but it's just giving me a warning about something to be mindful of, maybe a dependency from another module. But let's just see. Nothing too obvious, so I'm just going to move on for now. Disconnect, and we will delete fault memory. I think we're in a good enough shape to go for another test drive. So we have the same errors, but now it's basically coming from the SAS module. So now we could decide something. So I've done software updates on this, and without doing the software update on the gateway module, I wasn't able to clear an error that would come up as soon as it saw the encoding from an M340i. So that tells us that the only way you can write to this, since you can't encode it, is the software update. Coming over here, we saw that it was going to keep the same software, but just newer versions of it. So in other words, maybe an encoding would have been enough for these two. But we still have SAS errors. So let's go over to TAL calculating and look at the SAS module. So I'm not seeing a smoking gun here in terms of software changing, just newer versions. Okay, so what I see on the SAS module is bootloader doesn't change, hardware doesn't change, meaning they share the same module. Configuration files would change. So basically, this is similar to encoding. This 03 is the same, and then you have it going to a newer version of this. I'm not sure what to expect by updating this SAS module here, because at the end of the day, you just have newer versions. Nothing's really changing. This is a match. These numbers are all the same, but there's a big difference in these numbers. Not sure if there's just multiple updates. I guess the only thing we can do is try. All right, now I'm going after the SAS3 module for software update. Very good there. So this is something I was thinking of doing right after flashing the software. I should have done the steering startup, but I wasn't getting the associated error to say that is required. But maybe there's information that's stored on a chip inside the EPS from the car came out of that's not matching the vibration motor in my steering wheel. And by doing this, it's going to check all settings and it's going to recalibrate and potentially flash the tiny little chip on my vibration motor to say, be less aggressive because you're now working with this rack. It's the same part number. Let's see what happens if we try this. So it's saying it did it. Let's see what happens. So I noticed that some of the custom coding I was trying out to rule out errors retained even after a flash. So just to put things back to a baseline, I'm going to default encode the modules that I just flashed. And I'm default encoding with the M340i modified vehicle type. All right, just going through the list. I'm going to be updating the CAPS module software. So after that last clip, I stopped doubting the software and I started doubting the hardware. I went on Real OEM originally, and then that's where I thought that the 330i should have a vibration motor, but that's not always true, as we found out, which eventually led me to pulling the airbag off and looking inside here, seeing there's no vibration motor. And I left all that content in because I figured it'd be interesting and helps you understand how these cars are built. But now let's cut over to my driving impressions. All right, now I'm going to be giving you my impressions of how does a 330i feel with an M340i rack. Technically, I think this could be the only one in the world like this right now. It works seamlessly. The car doesn't throw errors. This rack is super fast. If you want to cut the wheels super hard and make an aggressive turn, this thing takes very little input compared to the stock rack. That's my first observation. Now, a quick rack really does make a huge difference. More than I expected. If you want to cut a quick UE, it takes no input. It's kind of crazy. But that's similar to my E90 with an active steering rack. So this rack feels perfect in comfort mode. Even if you're driving in Sport Plus, you'd want to do Sport Individual and leave it in comfort. What I've heard people say is that the M340i got the F30 rack carryover because of packaging issues. That's not quite true, because on the F30, it was able to vary the assistance based on speed. So if you're on the highway, it would get heavier, but it wasn't able to do anything about the ratio. On this rack, the T-spacing in the center is wide, so it's not overly sensitive. And then on the edges, as you turn in, it gets tighter, so it reacts faster dynamically. So it's changing the ratio on the fly, but in a fixed, it's predefined. It's not a planetary gear set. And it's also changing the assistance on the fly. So as I'm turning here, the steering wheel is as heavy as sport mode, and then it just went to being light. Now as you get higher up in speed while going straight, it gets heavy just dynamically with speed. So you don't get a lighter steering feel on the highway. Another observation is sitting at a light, the steering wheel doesn't transmit vibrations through to your hands of the engine. Not as much, or almost none. In terms of feeling the texture of the road, it transmits maybe 2 to 5% of that, whereas the 330i rack would give you more communication. Even though it was a slower rack with a 3.5 lock-to-lock turn ratio versus 2 on this, it would still let you feel a little bit of the texture of the road, maybe 15-20%. This is only like 5% max. So that is less communicative, but it's also more premium feeling. It makes the car feel like it's worth 10 grand more, like it's more related to a 5 Series. The biggest thing I could have said about a G80 is the fact that it kind of feels like an 8 Series when you're driving normally. Forget the fact that it's fast. It just had a different feel. This feels way more like a 5 Series now when you're just driving normally. But the thing is, because the variable ratio rack, when it loads things up, you get more feel as you're stressing the tires out. You can feel more pushback through the wheel as you're turning the wheel aggressively. So in that respect, I was surprised to find that. You're not sawing at the wheel, your hands aren't as busy, there's less hand over hand, so you get more of a dynamic driving experience. The car feels way more agile. I guess the best way to put it is, this would be a better getaway car now. You can feel when the tires are getting stiff. So it's kind of like it's just communicating vibration to you in a way to just let you know there's imperfections in the road, but not in an unrefined way. So as you go over little bits of ruts and imperfections in the road, you can feel them, but almost like it was through a piece of foam, and then someone was doing something on one side, you get the feeling on the other side. It's a premium version of communication of what's happening on the road. Less raw, less race car like. You have to give the 330i rack that it has just slightly more feel than any other power steering rack that I've felt that's electronic. But I guess you can't have a dual pinion with this variable ratio. It's just way too complicated. It would probably be a $3,000 rack and would have driven up the base price of this car to be able to maintain some feel of the road in terms of texture. But one thing you have to give this rack is the fact that it can respond super quickly. This is a really tight turn. The input level from my hands is way less. I would be going hand over hand here with the stock rack. So this does make it feel much more dynamic. I remember driving this before and I needed to put a lot more input on my hands. So this is a lot more premium feeling. And because right now it's light, now it's going heavy and getting really stiff, like Sport Plus stiffness, and it's going back to being light. I honestly don't know if that's just a result of the tighter spacing on the teeth, putting more load on the motor, and it just has a fixed assistance level in comfort mode, but it definitely gets stiffer and it feels good. This will give you a good feel of how dynamic the steering rack is. It's super quick. Like, this just gives you a sense. It's a great road to demonstrate the difference. I wish I had driven this road before and shown you how much input I was doing. Now, a 330i M Sport still came with a better steering rack than your regular 330 because it would change the assistance level depending on what mode you're in. If you're in comfort, it's lighter, and if you're in sport, it gets heavy. And then a lot of 330s don't even have that. They just feel the same regardless of mode. You only get differences in transmission and throttle inputs. So now losing 10% steering feel, 10 to 15% steering feel isn't much of a loss given the fact that the stock steering rack didn't really come into play until you cut the wheel hard and you'd kind of feel the tire folding over itself. But it took a lot of input to get there. So you kind of look like you're working really hard to get that feel out of it. Whereas this, as soon as you turn a quarter turn one direction or the other, you're getting a lot of steering feel right out the gate. Like right now, as the road is quite rough, I could just make out that there's imperfections. But to be honest, it feels a lot nicer. As I drive over these ruts in the road, it just feels refined in comparison. Now, my favorite thing so far is the fact that at highway speeds, it naturally gets stiffer progressively as you drive faster. You don't have to have it in sport mode, so it feels good on the highway. With the stock rack and comfort, steering would go light. And it's fine, you could always go sport individual and do sport steering, but there's only really a couple modes there. You have sport steering and regular steering. Maybe Sport Plus would get slightly heavier. I couldn't really feel a difference. But with this, it almost turns off the steering assist at highway speed, so the car feels nice and planted. The 10 or 15% loss in steering feel in terms of feeling the imperfections on the road is a trade-off. But the gain you get in terms of once you've passed about a quarter turn is like night and day. It's so much more dynamic and agile feeling when you have the wheel clocked just slightly. That's where the teeth on the rack get a little bit tighter spaced. The faster I go, the stiffer the steering wheel seems to get. So that kind of implies that as you clock the wheel, it can on the fly dynamically change the amount of assist. The steering is really heavy right now as I made that turn, and then it lightens right up. But before, it was just always the same amount of assist. So if you're in comfort and you're trying to go quick, it would make the steering kind of get light and make you feel like you're understeering or something. So yeah, slight trade-off in steering feel, huge benefit in feel of the tires in terms of the load they're under. Like a massive difference. And then also the ratio being a lot quicker. Could they have standardized to one rack across all G20s besides the G80? This is similar to a G80, just a different version. I think if I were to get a G80 rack, it would be too much. It would have upset the suspension and whatnot. It would be too quick. But this car being a true M Sport with all the M340i bits anyway, the suspension is reacting appropriately to the rack ratio. But turn in, you know, the fact that this front end is so light with the quick rack, it feels special. I didn't expect it to be this good. Like, the car feels a lot better. Feels way more sporty. So you'd have to ask yourself, okay, so the rack fits and it works seamlessly. Why didn't it come that way from the factory? If the M340i got that rack, was it strictly a packaging issue and they had to make it clear the 6-cylinder being longer? Or was it a price issue because it would cost too much to put it on the base model? Or was it an issue of you need to differentiate the 330i feel and the dynamicness of it from an M340i? Because if someone came to test drive an M340i and then they test drove a 330i to see if they could save a few bucks because they don't really care about all the power, they're still going to walk away saying, well, the car felt dynamically more alive with the M340i rack, and therefore, you know, that's what gave it that M Sport feel. That would be my guess. It was more about differentiating between models. Maybe there's a cost perspective. Alright, so those are my driving impressions. Now I'm going to cut over to be driving the car after swapping in a G80 wheel and having the assisted driving working again. It's safe to say that there's only a couple minor trade-offs in terms of going to this rack. Firstly, you get slightly less steering feel in terms of the texture of the road. But like I said, you get a lot more feel when you're loading up the tires. And technically the slower rack from the 330i wouldn't have to compensate as much at highway speeds. Even though the teeth spacing are more wide at highway speeds, it still technically would have the advantage of having a linear, slower rack so that it doesn't have to use the computers and the assisted driving module as much. It's kind of minor, not really noticing it in day-to-day, because right now it's handling this perfectly. But what I really love is if I was driving myself right now and I had my hands on the wheel, the weight at this speed, around 80 miles an hour, is a lot higher. So it feels more stable at highway speed because of the weight of the wheel. As you can see here, lane change when it's safe, no problem, handles it perfectly. Once your hands on the wheel technically, but as long as you initiate with your hands on the wheel, it would do it. Truth be told, at these type of highway speeds, you don't really want to feel the texture of the road in day-to-day driving. And you still get slight feedback, like 2 or 5%. I can still kind of just barely make out the imperfections on the road, but kind of like it's going through a heavy, dense foam buffer. So you still feel it, but in a refined way. Another point I'd like to make is I dialed in the alignment at home. The steering was pointed to the left, so that means when the steering wheel is pointed straight, wheels will be pointing to the right, so I just moved them over a little bit. Alignment's perfect, so I didn't need to take it to an alignment shop. So I'd say mission accomplished. I was able to give you feedback on what a 6-cylinder rack feels like on a 4-cylinder G20, but more importantly, I don't have any electrical gremlins to deal with when I put the engine in. I wanted the car to be driving just like OEM with no errors on the dashboard, so that when we put this engine in, if I get any new errors, they're going to be specific to the engine and I can sort those out individually. Quick update, I got the appropriate coolant lines from an M340i, so those will plug right in. I'm putting this engine in this weekend, so look out for the swap video to be coming up very soon. Thank you.